mean, in terms of violence against women and girls, what are your sort of views of it? How has it affected you personally? How has it affected friends, family? What are your perceptions of it and how it's impacted your lives?
Let's go first.
Yeah.
I think we've always had the discussion about it, whether that's with family or school. Especially being at an all-girls school, there's been a focus around it. I think it hasn't really impacted me personally, although you do the generic things like wanting to walk with people, scared of like walking in the dark. And I also work in a pub, and you kind of get exposed to some, usually older men, being sometimes a bit suggestive towards you, but that's something you have to learn with, which is sad because you probably shouldn't have to deal with it, but in this day and age you do. But yeah, I think especially because we go to this school, we get taught a lot about it, which is good.
Isn't it something that's brought up as part of your sort of day-to-day? Is it in conversation, educationally, and between your peer group?
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
And what are your, again, both perceptions of VAWG? Is it something that you feel impacts your life, friends, family?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like Phoebe, I've had no personal experiences, really nothing significant, but I think that's also because of the way we've been brought up. I haven't had any experiences because I've been told like, oh, you shouldn't wear that, you shouldn't like do that. So I think that kind of not hiding, but keeping yourself to yourself has kind of kept me safe, and that shouldn't be the way things are, but that's kind of what I've had to do. And there has been times where you have men, especially when you're walking down the street, they'll pap at you, they'll like shout at you, things like that. It's never been anything too serious. It's just things that, it's not a nice experience, but it's things that we've had to deal with growing up, being a girl.
And do you think that does impact, I suppose, when it becomes more, I suppose, severe crime? Do you think some of those behaviours that men or in your peer group are demonstrating sort of add to the problem, or what are your perceptions on that?
Sorry, could you?
Yeah, of course. So when people are, it's often sort of enveloped as banter, isn't it, or humour? Do you think that sort of adds to the problem about how men view women, that can potentially, in some cases, regrettably lead to more serious crime, effectively?
I mean, I went to a mixed school before this, and even boys there would be like making jokes about it, which obviously it's not something you joke about, is it? But it's just the way, I think there's this stigma where men are just like, they will always have that like, oh, she's wearing that for a reason, like she wants it, they always say, which obviously is not the case ever, really.
No. And do you think things like social media, because I think for me it was just on the cusp of almost becoming a thing, social media, I know for you all it's part of your day-to-day and everyday life, do you think that's adding to the issue in any way, or I suppose helping get better education out there, not wanting to prejudice your views? What do you think about social media? Do you think it's in any way adding to violence against women?
I think that sometimes you kind of feel that you don't want to, when you're like posting pictures, you kind of think about how people are kind of like see you and think like, oh well, if she's wearing like something slightly more revealing, then she's just like asking for it, and then it's like, oh, we'll just let boys be boys kind of thing you hear, and it's like, well, that shouldn't really like be the case, and you should just feel like, if you feel like confident, want to like post what you want, like if you feel confident, then that should be allowed. I know because I like go to the gym in the evenings after school because it's just a more convenient time for me, and so I get a train and then I walk there, so it's about a 10-15 minute walk, and it's like through like the middle of this like town kind of thing, and so I always feel like quite conscious. My mum's always like put like joggers and like a hoodie on like over the top of if I'm wearing like skin tight like leggings and things like that, and it's kind of like, obviously I understand to like, so that I'm not kind of like targeted almost, but it's kind of like a why should I have to like cover up and things like that, whereas if like a man had just been to the gym and then he just like walked down the street to go home, then like no one would think anything differently, whereas I might get like shouted at across the street or like pipped at or something like that, and so it's kind of just like why do I then have to cover up if I'm just in like leggings or something. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, do you feel as though in your peer groups, you know, is it that you still feel women are having to change their behaviours to not attract that unwanted attention? Do you think there's any ownership from your, I know this is at an all-girls school, but you know, male peers that actually think, oh well, part of the problem is with us and we need to change our behaviour towards women? Do you think there's any recognition from boys, men, that they need to look at their behaviour as you've just sort of suggested?
I think a lot more now.
Yeah.
Whether that's down to their mindset changing, but also I feel more confident calling boys up on it. I used to be less confident in myself, so I'd just take like the attention as a good thing, because I was like, oh, like they're looking at me, that's a good thing. But then now I've kind of like, even if my boyfriend would say something a bit off, I'd quite happy now call him up on it and say, do you know what, like even like jokes about like the women should be at home cooking. And I've had like, not an argument, but even my parents would say that, and sometimes I'd be like, actually, do you know what, you can't say that anymore, like it's the 21st century, you shouldn't have to. And we take psychology, and it's really interesting, we were learning about attachments, and basically saying that women have to stay at home when they've had a child because they need to form a primary attachment, whereas actually we've looked at research and that's not the case. So I think my mindset's changed, and I'm happy to call men up on if they say something.
Yeah, and do you both sort of feel the same? If you sort of all that behaviour, however much in jest it might be, which sometimes is often harder, isn't it, when someone's saying it more? Do you feel confident in calling out that behaviour, or have you seen a change in how your sort of male friends, family, approach the subject?
Well, I think like if I've had cases where I'm like, say, oh, you can't say that, and he'll say, oh, I'm just joking, like. It's the line, like them knowing what's banter and what's actually very offensive. And I feel like, yes, some boys, they have changed, but there will always be some immature who just don't change. Yeah. No matter what. I don't know if it's the way they've been brought up or just how they are, especially around their friends. I feel like boys on their own can be a lot better, but in a group, boys are all, they kind of just follow each other and see what the others say.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes men are, you know, in the media now, social media have started to talk about it, but sometimes it seems to be quite a lone voice. If it's in a collective, it's follow the sort of herd, so to speak. I mean, how about yourself? Have you found male friends, family sort of changing their behaviours at all?
Yeah, so from my personal experience, my friends that are actually like our age have actually been a lot better. So again, back to like the gym, they know that like if I'm doing something, then they'll be like focused on themselves and they won't feel the need to like comment or like make any like rude jokes, because they know that like obviously I think people that have been brought up like at our direct age are like better, whereas even if there's like 30-year-olds or like older people, they tend to like look more like kind of what you're doing and just like just not inappropriate saying, but just like longer, like just watching what you're doing kind of things, which is a bit like unnecessary in the sense that like, well, they're not watching me on my form really, like they're not like wanting to help. I mean, some try and help, but anyways, whereas like people my age, like, because I go with like one of my friends who's a guy, and he'll just focus on what he's doing because he knows that obviously it makes me feel more comfortable and things like that.
Absolutely. And in terms of sort of wider change that, you know, I know we've talked about a few different areas about what we think could help some of the issues, but do you think there's anything particularly within society, our culture, right going through to agencies such as the police, you know, which obviously are the sort of, sadly, the more severe end of dealing with crimes against women? What changes do you think need to happen to address, I suppose, the area of violence against women? What do you think would help change that cultural shift into addressing some of the problems?
I think maybe starting off like young in primary schools, like you'll have the saying, oh, boys are only mean to you because they like you, and it's like, well, actually that's probably not the case. So maybe addressing certain behaviours before they get out of hand, and also the police, like there's some like if we have PSHE lessons, some of the PowerPoints used could be like quite outdated and things like that, and I think they need to be current, and I think they need to be up to date and like targeted to a particular audience that is then like changed to like whatever school you go to or year groups you address, because obviously the message you give to year 13s are going to be different to what you give to year 7s.
Yeah.
So I think it shouldn't be like an overall PowerPoint or presentation. I think it should be, given to different year groups.
Yeah, absolutely. I think education is very key. It's a lot of the areas we've talked about, so it's really about tailoring that. I mean, how have you found, I suppose, speaking about education, the experience you've had about learning about healthy relationships, that side, is that something that's given you a lot of knowledge to feel confident in approaching your own relationships?
Yeah, definitely. We've had, in PSHE, we had I had a term on like relationships, which I found actually like quite eye-opening. I mean, there's some things that you don't actually take into account. So they talked about some things being like verbal abuse in relationships, and that's something that we focused on. And I think some of the time we actually don't realise when it's happening, and like we might not think at the time, oh, that's actually like they shouldn't be saying that. You just think, oh, I'm being really sensitive, but it is actually like something that I think is a real issue, and it's something that I'm glad has been raised at school.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as you say, that sometimes it can be very subtle, some people's behaviours, which sadly can lean on, progress from there. But as you say, it's about picking up on those signs, I suppose, at any stage in your varying relationships. And how about yourself? How have you found education, and equally, is there anything that you think societally wise or more broadly that you'd like to see sort of addressed, really?
I think that like the older generation, I don't know exactly how, but because obviously when people have like children and stuff, it's like the messages that they're then passing on to their children and like how they grew up and stuff. And so I think that because maybe like 40, 50-year-olds, they obviously grew up and it was a lot differently, and so I think that they need to almost be educated more about like how things have changed, and like teaching their children about like today's society, and but obviously not like feeling like obviously teaching like boys and stuff to be respectable, and girls not to feel like they need to hide themselves and things, because obviously they then teach their children and so on. And so I think that addressing it to slightly older people would also help the whole society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it stems from not just education, it's parental sort of approaches as well, how your parents, your family approaches the whole subject, because as you say, it's very different, I imagine, throughout the ages about how this has sort of come forward. So is there any message that you'd want to give, I suppose, your wider peer group, anyone listening, wider society about this area that you'd want people to think about and take away from today, or something that you feel is quite personal to you in terms of how you perceive violence against women? Is there any message you would like to communicate at all?
I think you shouldn't settle for less. Like, you should always know your worth, and if you think there's a problem with it, shouldn't be scared to speak up about it, because you've probably got people that are less confident than you feeling the exact same thing. And if you feel like you can speak about it, you should be the voice of other people to speak up.
Definitely. Is there anything you both wanted to add?
I think it's really important that girls and boys know that. I think there's this, I don't know what the word is, but lots of girls don't want to go and talk to the police if they've had a bad experience. They have this, the police won't listen. I hear that quite a lot, but in reality, nothing's going to make it better, so you don't know until you try. So if something's happened that's serious, that's upset you, that a male's done or a female's done to you, then to speak up about it and not keep it in.
Absolutely.
Just to yourself.
Definitely.
I would say to just like not just follow with what your friend's doing just because they are all doing it. Like if you think it's wrong, then or just like pull them up on it, and like don't just follow what they're doing blindly just because everyone else is doing it. Like because obviously it might not be okay, and just because they're doing it, like just to speak up for yourself.
Absolutely.
If you see something that shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, and have that confidence to challenge it and come forward. No, that's been really useful. Ames, is there anything?
Yeah, I did actually. So obviously you're getting towards the end of your education in schooling now, and you'll be looking maybe at going to university or going getting jobs and careers out after school. How do you think you're going to take that forward, this knowledge of what you're your words are so strong, like it's really amazing. But so going forward, when you're out of this sort of educational system where your peers are all the same age as you in many respects, how do you feel as a adult grown up approach? Will you still feel the same confidence to approach that maybe with in the future?
It's probably hard to say because we're in like a bubble at the moment and we haven't been exposed to it, and it's hard when maybe your peers that are older than you don't share the same opinions. But I think especially going off to university, you're going to be surrounded by people that are older and boys that, obviously because we're at an all-girls school, we haven't been fully exposed to it. But I think as long as we're confident in ourselves and we're aware of the surroundings, but I think if you have the opinions now, then you should keep the viewpoint when you're older. So yeah,
Definitely.
Well, I think going into the big wide world is quite daunting. But I definitely am going to keep my views, and I'm going to continue to tell someone if what they've done has upset me and things like that. Let men know that what they're doing is wrong, if they do something wrong, obviously. But yeah, I'm just going to keep being confident in that because it's something I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's great to hear. How about
Yeah,
you?
I think that I'll just make sure that like my friends kind of follow the same. So to make sure, because obviously it's all well and good knowing it yourself, but then if you see like one of your friends perhaps not so confident or not really sure if something that happened is like right, or whether to like pull them up on it if like something happened to them that you noticed that they just didn't perhaps like pick up on, to just make sure that they're okay.
Definitely. And it's really, encouraging to hear your confidence in how you feel about, how you would approach it, your peer group. And I think it's just really wonderful to hear that, you're going to carry that through your education or onto careers. So, no, thank you. That's been really valuable to hear your opinions.
Thank you.
Thank you.